Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, continuing Śrī Tattva-sutra. We're starting Sutra 5 today, but I'll read Sutra 4 so we have the context. So Sutra 4 was that Supreme Lord, having a Satchidananda form, is not perceivable to the cognitional faculty, the mental capacity of the jivas, but is only realized by the spiritual function called bhakti. Now, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur points out as his transition into Sutra 5, if someone misunderstands the eternally existent, transcendental, and blissful divinity as a transient entity bound by time and space, the next sutra answers this doubt. So if someone doesn't understand the Satchidananda form, and they think, oh, this is actually a temporary form, this is why the next sutra is written. Sacha satyo nityo nadir ananto desha kala parichedat. The Supreme Lord is an eternal reality without a beginning or an end, unbound by the influence of time and space. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's commentary. Contrary to all mundane objects, which always have a beginning and end, meaning that they go through the 6 transformations, the Satchidananda personality of Godhead is real, eternal, beginningless, and endless. Time and space are creations of the Lord, and thus they cannot influence him. Right? These things come from him. So he influences them in the sense that he made them, but they cannot influence him. In Śrī Īśopaniṣad, mantras 4 and 8, it is stated, although fixed in his abode, the personality of Godhead is swifter than the mind and can overcome all others running. Such a person must factually know the greatest of all, the personality of Godhead, who is unembodied, omniscient, beyond reproach, without veins, pure and uncontaminated. So the first one in this first verse 4 and the second half of 8 is showing how these seeming contradictions actually can exist in the Supreme Lord, who is the source of everything. Things that we cannot understand through mental speculation actually can exist. And such a person who can understand that, then he can factually know the greatest of all, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who has these seemingly contradictory qualities for those that are engrossed in material knowledge. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur continues, if an argument is put forth that the ultimate reality, capital, so that's Krishna, endowed with all those mentioned excellences, is quite unintelligible, inconceivable to the human knowledge, and since it is very faintly understandable, it can only be a subject of dry speculation of the jivas. The following sutra dispels that doubt. So if one's saying, this doesn't make any sense, that all of these things that seem to be contradictory are actually there, so you can't really conceive of it, so it must be a speculation of some imperfect being. If someone makes that argument, then Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur provides the next sutra, number 6. Paropichij jadabhayam vilasi vishva siddhe. Although the Supreme Lord is transcendental, the mundane universe consisting of sentient and non-sentient principles. So sentient means able to perceive things. So those who are able to perceive things, and the things that are just gross matter, unable to perceive, is created due to his sportive spirit, so his playful spirit. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur comments, the Supreme Lord creates all types of sentient and non-sentient objects by his potency and manifests his pastimes among them. This world is full of wonderful, pleasing arrangements. The inconceivable connection between the sense organs and the corresponding materials, availability of different materials according to the physical needs, habitational facilities of the living beings by the division of land, seas, and the beautiful performance and usefulness of the planets, stars, stellar and solar systems, determination of time according to the seasons. All these systematic and unprecedented arrangements cannot be created by inert matter or dry sentience. Without accepting the sportive nature of the Lord, there cannot be any pleasant conclusion. Okay, this is a paragraph that there's a lot of words in there that might be confusing. Essentially, the fact that basically it's saying that the fact that every living entity, and there's such a huge variety of living entities, they all have their own unique habitational facilities, means their own environment that they can thrive in, which is given by the divisions of land, seas, and the way that the planets and the stars and the solar and star systems are moving and creating different seasons, etc. This shows that there has to be some intelligence behind it, and that this is his sportive nature, his playful nature. That's what this paragraph is saying. So actually, even the scientists admit this. There was a documentary. I don't know if they showed it to you too. They showed it to us when we took Bhakti by Bhav. It was basically a series of videos explaining Darwin's theory. And in his own words, he basically says that if we find out through observation that basically, I have to word it my own way because I can't remember exactly what his words were, but essentially what he was saying was that if we come to understand through observation, which is their idea of what science is, that statistically these the necessary functions that all have to come together in a very specific way, if statistically they're basically close to impossible, then it has to be that there was some intelligence in building that. Because by chance, sometimes something can happen, right? If I have a handful of matches and I throw them in the air and they land on the ground, sometimes the matches will spell out letters, but it's almost impossible. And even if there are a few letters that sort of form in some sort of way, there won't be many words if you do that a million times. And even if you do somehow get a few, small, like 3-letter words that magically happened over those thousands and thousands of times of just randomly throwing matchsticks in the air, you're not going to get a complete sentence, let alone an intelligible one, right? So in statistics, this means that, basically it's impossible. If there's an impossible circumstance for something to happen and it's happening all around you, it means that something was actually doing it. It wasn't chance, right? So essentially that's what this paragraph is stating. From these evidences follows that a certain sportive person has established all these insurmountable rules for the benefit of the world, right? Because there are rules that we can observe. If I hold this up and I let go of it, it's going to fall, right? And we can keep doing that and say, see that now, I've observed something. This is, and I'll give it a name, I'll call it gravity. And then I'll try to figure out, okay, why? Why does it do that? Why doesn't it go up? Why doesn't it go sideways? And then, so, who was it, Newton? Newton came up with the idea that, well, this is a small thing, and the earth is a very big thing. And so small things are attracted to big things. That's a good way to put it, right? Because no matter where you are on this planet, if you drop it, it'll go down, right? And they did this by experimentation. Later, Einstein came along and he said, well, this can't be the whole story, because if that were the truth, then everything would be coming closer and closer to the sun until everything is finished. Yeah, well, everything would be attracted because the sun is the biggest thing. So everything would be coming toward the sun, and it would have the gravity pulling it. So then Einstein came up with what he calls the theory of relativity, right? And he calls it a theory because it's not proven; it's just an idea. So the Newton's law of gravity wasn't complete, and he knew that. So he gave a theory of what also could be going on. So theory of relativity means that there's different things that can have their different gravities, but as long as they're situated in a certain way, they're not affecting one another. And the way this is generally explained in like science classes, because in science classes you kind of need to see, you need some pratyaksha, you need to be able to experience it. You can't just give a logical explanation and like, okay, all right, I can see how that might work. So what they do is they take a big sheet of rubber, right? So it can bend, and they put a couple of balls on the rubber sheet. And so each of them sinks down into this rubber sheet. And so there are basically divots around these. So some are big and heavy and some are smaller. And so each of these has their own sort of divot. And then if you take a really small ball and kind of roll it in one of these craters that are formed into this rubber sheet, it'll start going around one of these. And so that they consider that each planet's gravity, so they have some moons and things like that. The problem with that explanation is that they're using gravity to explain gravity. If you have the rubber sheet and there's no actual gravity, which is the attraction to Anantashesh, which is actually what gravity is, then it wouldn't press down into the rubber sheet, right? It would just sit on top of it or float or, whatever. So you can't use something to prove itself. That's actually a fallacy. You can't say, 2 plus 2 is 4 because 2 plus 2 is 4. No, you have to explain it. You have to explain it another way. Or, this is glass, which it's not. It's metal because it's glass, right? You can't. This isn't the way you can logically present things. So, although it can make some sense and you can see it and you can say, okay, yeah, that could be it. Einstein was smart enough to realize that it was just a theory because, you can't know for sure, really, right? But we can know for sure because we learn from Shabda. We learn from the Vedas of how everything is actually moving. And so since these things are going on in a very harmonious way, the different planets, the stars, as Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur mentioned, all of the different habitats for all of the different types of living entities, they're all organized in a perfect way. You have the divisions of land and seas and mountains, and all of this is going on and cooperating. So we can see that, yes, this is, there's some intelligence behind it. So we can even logically understand that, right? And scientifically, and I'm using the air quotes because I'm talking about modern scientists who can observe laws and try to define them and maybe say how they work. Since they're not actually understanding where those laws come from the Supreme Lord, they don't have a full understanding of them. So they can only observe partially how they work. So they're still a little intelligent enough to realize that depending on the external circumstances, the experiment will change, depending on what the temperature is, what the atmospheric pressure is. So if you're at a different altitude and you're cooking, for example, something will cook faster because there's more pressure involved. So they have a little bit of credit in that they can observe God's laws and understand when there's a difference in what they would normally do. And, oh, well, now we're at a higher elevation. So then they could test that. Now, well, if I go in some other country at a higher elevation, will it be the same? Or is it because of something else? So they can observe these things and they can know them a little bit. But if we want to truly know them, we have to understand them through Krishna's perspective, because he's the one that made all of it. So, from these evidences follows that a certain sportive person has established all these insurmountable rules for the benefit of the world. The Lord's pastimes are of two types. One, the creation of the sentient and non-sentient beings, so those who are conscious and those who are not conscious, and establishing the rules for them. And then in brackets says the dry speculators can have faint idea about this. And it means they can understand a little bit about it, but they can't fully understand. And then two, the second type of Lord's pastimes is manifestation of Lord's spiritual pastimes in this universe. All possible positions the jiva can take in this world refer to respective divine manifestations. In this connection, most of the sages scientifically accept 10 important avatars of Lord Vishnu. And then this says invertebrate, but actually Matsya is an aquatic vertebrate. So Matsya, Shelly, Korma, vertebrae, Varaha, erect vertebrae, as in a combined form of man and beast, which is Nrsimha, mankind, Vamana, barbaric, Parashuram, civilized, Ram, wise, Krishna, ultra-wise, Buddha, and destructive, Kalki. By the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, the expert devotees realized the supreme divinity of Lord Krishna, and especially the extreme sweetness of his Vrindavan pastimes. The Lord's pastimes are eternal and transcendental, and not mythological or historical. Srila Prabhupada writes in his purport to Śrī Īśopaniṣad Mantra 13, Lord Krishna is the original personality of Godhead, and everything that exists has emanated from him. The Bhagavad Gita 10:8, in the Bhagavad Gita chapter 10 verse 8, the Lord says, I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. The wise who perfectly know this engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. Here is a correct description of the Supreme Lord given by the Lord himself. The words Sarvasya Prabhava indicate that Krishna is the creator of everything, including Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And because these three principal deities of the material world are created by the Lord is the creator of all that exists in the material and spiritual worlds. Thus, all Vedic literature confirms that Narayana, or Krishna, is the cause of all causes, sarva karma karma. In the Brahma Samhita 5.1, it is also said that the Supreme Lord is Sri Krishna, Govinda, the delighter of every living being, and the primeval cause of all causes. The really learned persons know this from evidence given by the great sages and the Vedas, and thus they decide to worship Lord Krishna as all in all. Such persons are called Buddha, or really learned, because they worship only Krishna. Then Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur continues, although it is established beyond a doubt that the Lord and his potency are simultaneously distinct and non-distinct, there are some people who argue that the Lord and his potencies are only distinct, right? They're only separate. In the next sutra, the author refutes the idea that the transcendental potency is different from the Lord himself. Sutra 7. right? Everybody got that? So some people are just saying that there's nothing in common with the living entities and the Lord. They think it's just separate. So for those that think that, this next sutra is given. Tat-chak-titas tattva-tikyam iti chin-natad abhidat. The Lord's transcendental potency is a separated, isolated principle, but it is only identical with Him. So separate, but identical. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur comments, there is no distinction between the Lord and His Lordship. Both these aspects are united in the Supreme Reality, who is one without a second. The power of burning is inseparable from fire, the diamond from its hardness, the body and the limbs are constituents of the same object, and the sun and sunlight cannot be treated as two separate objects. Similarly, the Lord and His potency are not separate from each other. The Supreme Lord Radha Krishna is the undivided Supreme Reality. In this purport to mantra 4 of Śrī Īśopaniṣad, Srila Prabhupada explains that this non-difference should not be misunderstood. Quote, thus, the different energies of the Lord are present everywhere. Although the Lord and His energies are non-different, one should not mistake these energies for the Supreme Truth. Nor should one wrongly consider that the Supreme Lord is distributed everywhere impersonally, or that He loses His personal existence. Men are accustomed to reaching conclusions according to their capacity for understanding, but the Supreme Lord is not subject to our limited capacity for understanding. So just as we were saying, the so-called scientists of this age can observe God's laws and understand them to an extent. But one of the problems with conditioned beings is they can't see beyond their own experience, right? So for example, one of the things they've said for a long, long time, is there can't be life on other planets because in order for a planet to sustain life, there has to be a certain temperature, there has to be a certain amount of oxygen, there has to be a certain amount of water, there has to be so many things. And these are based on the human experience. Humans need a certain amount of sunlight and a certain temperature and a certain amount of water. However, even though these scientists have direct experience of a whole lot of living entities living underwater, which is definitely not suitable for human beings to live, even though they see, there are other types of living beings that can live in different conditions, still they claim, no, there can't be life on these other planets. What they should conclude is there can be life on these other planets, they just have to have different types of bodies that are acclimated to these environments, right? And we have direct experience of it. There's all of these things living in the ocean. We can't live in the ocean. So therefore, we're not very smart. So again, I'm going to read this section, or this sentence, because it's brilliant, and we need to really understand it, because otherwise we may think that these modern scientists are way more intelligent than they actually are, and we might actually start worshiping them, listening to what they're saying and trying to understand. So men are accustomed to reaching conclusions according to their capacity for understanding, right? Only according to their own capacity. But the Supreme Lord is not subject to our limited capacity for understanding. It is for this reason that the Upanishads warn us that no one can approach the Lord by his own limited potency. The Supreme Lord is unlimited. We have limited intelligence. How do we possibly think that we can understand Him? We can't even understand ourselves. We don't know how our heart is beating, how it's pumping the blood. We know that it has to, because if it stops, then, the body dies. We don't consciously breathe when we fall asleep. No, it's just going on, right? We don't know how it's done. We don't have to know how it's done. It just happens, right? So to think that even though we can't even figure out our own bodies, let alone that which animates the body, right? Because some people become experts in different fields, right? There are people that have studied the brain, so they know, they look under an fMRI machine, and they do these experiments where they make you feel different emotions, and they see which parts of the brain are lighting up, so they can map out, okay, this part of the brain is for pleasure, this part is for pain, this part is for if you're really pensive, thinking about something hard, this part is for, fear, etc., right? They can map these things out, and they can become what they call experts in things. And they can even try to fix someone's ailment, and they've been doing this for a very long time. It was lobotomy back in the day. They would drill into someone's head and disable parts of the brain that, for example, made them feel depressed, right? And sometimes they were a little bit successful, right? So the person would still be alive, but they would be in a vegetative state. There wouldn't be problems anymore. So if someone was creating a problem in society, they would just take away the part of the brain that was problematic to them at the time. So these things were going on. So we think we're a bit more advanced now than then. Now we're actually mapping out the brain with these fancy gizmos, and then we can go in with precision with lasers and just take out these little tiny parts, and somehow we consider that less barbaric. But the truth is, we don't fully understand it, so we really shouldn't be messing with it, right? So that if we think that even though we can't even fully understand what's going on in just this body, that we can actually figure out the Supreme Lord who designed the whole thing. Not only did he design this complicated body, but the complicated planets and stars and solar system, which sustains all of these things naturally, automatically. When we think with our limited intelligence, poor funded knowledge, that we can figure him out, then we are not very intelligent at all. So this idea of only accepting things that we have the capacity to understand with our limited senses is downright ludicrous. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur continues. Here, at this point, someone may protest, is it not so that by creating the material worlds and performing other activities, the Supreme Personality of Godhead becomes affected by that activity, and his nature becomes different from what it was before? Does he not become enamored of what he has created? In the next sutra, the author refutes this misconception, right? So it's an understandable protest. When we do something, when we perform an activity, especially if we think we've invented something, right? If we think that we've created something that's useful, we become enamored with it, right? So since men are accustomed to reaching conclusions according to their own capacity, we're thinking, well, God must also become enamored because this is a very elaborate thing that's going on. It's, universes and solar systems, and it's all working properly. It's amazing to behold. So who wouldn't become enamored with their invention like that, right? So in case someone has this misconception, then Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur presents us Sutra 8 as follows. Kartapyavikara Svatantrayat. Because he is the absolute autocrat means the authority that has complete and total power. Because he is the absolute autocrat, he does not become transformed, even though he is the creator. Right? So if he has ultimate power, then he's not affected by what he creates. We don't have ultimate power, so whatever we think we create, we become enamored with. But he is the absolute autocrat. He has complete and total power, therefore nothing can overpower him. Then Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur elaborates. All universal laws are creations of the Lord. These laws are insurmountable, means they cannot be overcome, they cannot be disobeyed. These laws are insurmountable by the power of the inconceivable divine potency. It is a law of the Lord that whoever creates will definitely be biased due to his willingness for creation. But the Supreme Lord is not bound by this law, and thus he remains unbiased or unchanged, even after his creation of the sentient objects, non-sentient objects, and their mutual relations. Another aspect of the Lord's supreme independence is shown in the purport to Śrī Īśopaniṣad, Mantra 12. The Sanskrit word asambhuti refers to those who have no independent existence. Sambhuti is the absolute personality of Godhead, who is absolutely independent of everything. In the Bhagavad Gita 10.2, the absolute personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna states, neither the host of demigods nor the great sages know my origin or opulences, for in every respect I am the source of the demigods and sages. So as Pandava pointed out, was it this morning when he was talking about Lord Brahma? I think it was. Or was it last week? Was it last week? Okay. Yeah, maybe. Time is a strange thing. Or no, it was at the Vyasa Puja that he was talking about that, or was it in class? It was at the Vyasa Puja. Okay, so maybe you guys didn't hear this. So I was in a different environment, but I was sitting next to him just like I was sitting here. So Lord Brahma, he wakes up and he's in a strange place. It's dark. He doesn't know what's going on. And he sees, okay, well, I'm in this thing. It was a lotus flower, but he's trying to figure out what's going on. He can't see anything, so he's just sort of feeling around. And he feels that, okay, there's a stem, so he starts climbing down, and then there's this ocean. He can't see a thing, but he's trying to sort of, figure out what's going on, because there must be some meaning to why he woke up in such a strange position. And when he tried to figure it out himself, he couldn't at all. So he climbed back up onto where he started, where he began, where his consciousness, where he first was conscious. And he started hearing the waves of the ocean, of the Garva ocean. And they were going, ta, pa, ta, pa. Right? This is the noise they were making. So he understood, oh, tapa, I have to perform some austerity. Right? So he did. He started meditating, started performing this austerity. And then through that, it was revealed to him by the Supreme Lord what his duty was. This is what you do. Everything you need is there. You actually just explored all of it, but you couldn't make any sense out of it. So now I'll tell you what to do. You take everything that's here, and all of the ingredients are here in this lotus stem, and you expand the universe, right? So Lord Brahma didn't understand where he came from, right? So neither the host of demigods nor great sages know my origin or opulence, for in every respect I am the source of the demigods and sages. So unless one is actually understanding from Krishna directly, you will not understand what's going on, right? Krishna directly means Krishna himself or one of his authorized representatives. That's repeating what he said. So if we're trying to figure out anything on our own without the help of the Vedas, we are not going to be successful. So this is the point here. Thus, Krishna is the origin of the powers delegated to demigods, great sages, and mystics. Although they are endowed with great powers, these powers are limited, and thus it is very difficult for them to know how Krishna himself appears by his own internal potency in the form of a man. You told the story of Brahma at the Vyasa Puja, right? It wasn't here? Going for a swim? That was at the Vyasa Puja, right? Okay. Somehow I thought it was here for a minute.
Maybe I also mentioned it.
Maybe. Anyway, now you got it again. If you heard it before, I'm sure you heard it at some point. Okay. Many philosophers and great rishis or mystics try to distinguish the absolute from the relative by their tiny brain power. This can only help them reach the negative conception of the absolute without realizing any positive trace of the absolute, right? So it means they can understand what God is not to an extent, but they can't realize what God actually is. And so when one tries to rely on this, you end up thinking that maybe God doesn't have a form, because I have a form and it's measurable, it's temporary, so he can't have it. He can't have pastimes because those also, that's measurable. You know, you can't have a name, right? Yes.
Basically, that means that even we, although devotees practicing, having some theoretical knowledge about Krishna, actually we don't know what's going on. Because Krishna revealed himself to some extent, but not completely. So many of the spiritual things we are guessing actually was the spiritual reality. Of course, we have the authority of Shastra, the explanations of other devotees. But again, one part of it is kind of we, until Krishna reveals it completely, here we are guessing to some extent.
Yes, which is why this concept is repeated over and over in Shastra that comes up time and time again. Essentially, well, we'll start with Srila Rupa Goswami, that Shruti Smriti Puranadi Pantratra Vidina. If anything, basically, he's talking about devotional service, but you can extend it to anything else also. If you're ignoring the Shruti, the Smriti, the Puranas, the Vedas, then you're creating an unnecessary disturbance in society, right? So if what we're hearing and speaking and understanding is based on Shastra, actually, then to that extent we know Krishna, at least in theory. We may not see Krishna in that way, but at least if we accept it, and that's what we repeat with sincerity, then to that extent we're in good shape. Whenever we talk about anything else that's not either directly Vedic, so the Shruti, or in pursuance of the Vedic version, the Smriti, if it's not supported by that, that's where we're not understanding anything. And we're just going to create unnecessary disturbances in society because we're going to perpetuate this illusion, right? So later, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is going to explain that the soul, he has an eternal nature, an eternal characteristic. His nature is knowledge, transcendental knowledge, and his characteristic is love, right? But when we misuse our free will, instead of transcendental knowledge, we have material knowledge, which, since we think that we're the center, the controller, the enjoyer, it takes us further and further away from our actual relationship with Krishna. And also, when we misuse that free will, our love, our pure love of Krishna, with Krishna in the center and us serving, turns into lust. And that can take many different forms. And some of the forms, which we'll get to probably within the next couple of days, are actually quite surprising because they actually sound like they're good qualities, right? But since they're perverted reflections, even though they seem like good qualities in the material world, they're actually bad qualities because they're keeping us from our true relationship. So the soul has these things, the qualities and characteristics of knowledge and love. But since we misuse our free will, basically, essentially, if it's not connected to the Vedas or anything pursuant to the Vedic version, it's going to be the perverted reflection. And so it's going to be causing bondage. But that which we actually understand, again, at least in theory, then that we do know about Krishna. So yeah, there's a lot we don't know about Krishna. But the more we monitor ourselves and are, diligent, the more we're diligent about trying to base our life what's presented in Shastra through the instructions of the Guru and the example of the other sadhus, then the more Krishna will reveal to us. When he sees our sincerity, that that's what we're trying to do. But if he sees us cultivating these things outside, then he knows that we're not ready. So the revelation doesn't come. Right? Did that answer what you were saying? Is there something more that you wanted to add? Good. Yes.
It's another aspect, I think, is that what expects a devotee as a reward. of course, the devotees don't want to reward. Many times, it is mentioned in different shastras that it will be above the devotees' expectation. So we may conceive something about Krishna or spiritual or the reciprocation, but it will be way beyond. So in a sense, it is okay. In one sense, it is our lack of qualification, etc. But in another sense, it is the unlimited mercy and compassionate nature of Krishna and love for his devotee, because he has something amazing in stock for us.
Good.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so it comes down to the consciousness, because even if you're accepting that Krishna is the Supreme Lord and you're doing some service for him, it depends on what your consciousness is, because if you're doing that service to get some material benefit, right, like we read about the Devatas, sometimes they're more interested in their material pleasure than they are in actually serving. It means they always accept Krishna, they always accept Vishnu. But sometimes they're more interested in enjoying their position than actually, preaching the glories of Krishna. Even though they accept them, they're still, sort of not always focused. So we have to make sure we're not falling into that trap too. So it's the consciousness. So you can engage in Krishna's service, but maybe you're just trying to get a position, a social position, right? And so if that's the consciousness, then Krishna's not going to reveal himself. But if we're doing the service because we want to serve him, and we're actually cultivating that relationship with him, Krishna's in the center, not us, then Krishna becomes revealed. So it's not the activity that makes Krishna reveal himself. He's not subject to, because here in the material world, you do the activity, and then you get the thing, and it's a reciprocation. But it's not about the activity with Krishna, it's about the move, the consciousness. You can't trick him. You could try to trick him, right? We tried to trick him. He got his head cut off. And now he's too different. His plan is very inauspicious. He dressed up as, he sat between the sun and the moon. Rahu. Rahu and Ketu, right? So he thought, something fishy's going on here, and I think that the demons are going to get, they're going to get cheated. So he dressed up as, yeah, I'm a Devata. And he had the nectar in his lips, the Mohini Murti. So we can go through the motions and, even look the part, but if our consciousness isn't there, you can't cheat Krishna. He's the of gambling. I am cheats, right? He's the supreme cheater. He's the supreme everything. So you can't out cheat the supreme cheat. Yes.
It's interesting. You mentioned this last time. I'm just reading today. So the demigods, they don't have always like pure motivation, like in this pastime. Their motivation was they lost what they had and they wanted to
Get it back.
But still, when they were in a serious confrontation with the demons, and even the demons they were taking over, Krishna personally came with Garuda and fought on the side of the demigods.
Sure did.
And killed the demons. One would expect that, you see, like he's completely impartial and just going to stay and watch. And yeah, maybe okay, he will be like on the side of the demigods.
Kind of rooting, but spectating, cheering, but not getting involved.
Or even he may say, yeah, why I have to...
That would be deism.
Or someone may say, why he has to take the side of the demigods when their motivation is not pure? What you're discussing now, like they doing it a little bit with selfish motivation.
Yeah.
And the demons are also doing it with selfish motivation. So one has to take practically.
That's a great question. So the idea is that they both had selfish motivation, but at least the demigods were actually understanding that Krishna is the supreme. They weren't really acting completely in that capacity because they're still thinking that they're actually, something. But since they, at least in theory, except that's why devotees are so dear to Krishna, even if they're committing mistakes, they're still saying, no, Krishna, you're the one that's in control. And I'm still trying to realize that in the meantime, I'm committing these mistakes, but I, in my heart, believe that you are the Supreme Lord. So that counts for something. The demons, no. Sometimes they'll follow the Vedic process better than the demigods do. We have a few examples of it. Hiranyakashipu, the pastime that ends up with Vritrasur. And Vritrasur actually has to preach to Indra. You got a demon preaching to the, what are you doing, man? You went to this Brahmana to get his bones to create a weapon because Lord Vishnu, specifically told you how to kill me. And now you've hit me with it once and it did something big, but now you're going back to your own weapon, which is useless. What are you doing? You think you have prowess now because you knocked me down? It's like, no, put your weapon down, pick that thing back up, because that's meant to kill me, right? But that's how Indra was. As soon as he saw that he had the upper hand again, because before he had to actually flee his own kingdom. But when he got that weapon and he saw that it was working, then again he thought, oh, just see, I have prowess again. No, you don't have prowess. It was all in the weapon. It was all in that weapon that Krishna specifically told you to make from these specific ingredients and used in a very specific way, right? So as long as we listen to him, it works. As soon as we don't, it doesn't. But if at least while we're messing everything up, we still deep down are accepting him, he will be on our side. And it's not really impartial. It's as they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Or did I say it's not partial? That's what I meant to say. I might have said impartial. Yeah, so it's not him being partial, it's him reciprocating. So we have to keep that in mind as aspiring devotees, that just because we're on the right side and Krishna's always going to have our back, it doesn't mean that we're not going to get knocked around, and it doesn't mean that we're always in the right position. It means that we're in a favorable position, but we always have to strive to reach perfection. Yeah, that happens a lot when the demons take over.
And they know who is Vishnu, and still they.
Yeah, they just figure he's another
somehow
Devata, because they're powerful, he's powerful. Somehow he always wins, but they think it's because of something else, not because he's the Supreme Lord, some other reason.
Good luck.
Yeah. I don't remember how we got there. Because we were talking about by negation. Anyway, however we got there, that's where we ended up. Good? Something else?
Talking about Krishna is compassion.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the question. How come he's compassionate? He kills the demons. But you asked me before.
Oh, you're telling me how we got there. Oh, okay. I got you. Thank you. Yeah, so we really have to understand that, because otherwise, have you ever met someone who's the son of someone who's very rich and they're just a complete jerk? You have? Okay. Yeah, I've met a lot of those kind of people. And they think that just because their parents are wealthy that they can get away with anything. Yeah. So if we as devotees who are under the protection of the Supreme Lord still act like jerks and do it because we know that Krishna is going to have our backs, we're not in a very good position. It's actually a terrible position, because then we're also, from a preaching point of view, we're because we're representing our family, Krishna, and we're showing him in a bad light. That's why so many people these days have a problem with religion. It doesn't matter what religion it is. They see followers of said religion doing some nonsense and saying, well, it's because this is what God says, but they're not actually, following properly. So that, there's all sorts of fights and wars and battles and just inappropriate behavior. And so we want to make sure that we don't fall into that, just knowing. So we shouldn't be members of Krishna's family in that sense. We should actually understand what Krishna's family means and actually represent that, right? What it means to actually be Krishna conscious. And it's our duty to show what Krishna consciousness actually is, not from just an external point of view, but an actual understanding and behavior, right? It's not that we just hear about it and repeat it. It's that we hear about it, we contemplate it, we repeat it, we act accordingly, and we become it, right? It becomes our life, right? So there's acting accordingly, but then there's, that's basically, that takes you into nishta, your steady, acting accordingly. But then it actually becomes part of your identity when you actually start to get a taste, and then you get attached to it, especially in the attachment, then it's actually your identity. Because if someone tried to take that away from you, it would be a problem. You're that attached. So at that point, it actually becomes part of your identity. So that's what we're going for. We're not going for understanding something and acting accordingly. That's a good first step, right? But as Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur pointed out when we studied Monday, when we were talking on Friday about the stepping stone principle, we don't want to stop there, just acting accordingly. We want it to become part of our being, so we're true representatives of Krishna's family, right? Otherwise, we're just that, jerk kid of a rich person that has no idea, how to make money, how to spend money, how to be responsible. None of that, right? So we want to make sure that we're actually Krishnaites, right? That we're actually following properly. Otherwise, sure, Krishna will have our back. Have you ever had a friend? Here's another one. Have you ever had a friend who's kind of a jerk to other people, and he starts fights, and then you have to finish the fight, or you have to break up the fight, or a relative? In my family, because my dad's, there were 12 kids in his family, and our last name is Tup. We tend to have a short temper, short fuse, and over the decades, some of us have learned to become detached from these things, but traditionally we Clubs were very short tempered. So there would be fights all the time when my dad was growing up and his brothers. And even if one of the brothers did something wrong, if someone started a fight with him, all of the brothers would go fight whoever was fighting him. And then since they did something wrong, then they would fight the brother, right? Because you actually shouldn't have done that. Say somebody was, one of the brothers was trying to steal someone's girlfriend, right? So yeah, he deserved to get beat up, but not by you. If anybody's going to beat him up, it's going to be me, right? So the reason I bring this up is because just as we will protect our friends and family, even if they do something wrong, it's not a good relationship. We'll do it because the relationship is strong, But it's not the kind of relationship that you want to really maintain and relish. At some point, you're going to say, look, wise up, stop doing this, right? So in the same way as if we keep falling back on, oh yeah, but I'm an aspiring devotee of Krishna, so it doesn't matter, then it's not a good relationship. It's better when the relationship is actually there. And sure, Krishna will always have our back, and we're also, properly reciprocating with him. That's what we want to go for. So these are the lessons that we can learn by reading the pastimes of the demigods, and because they're all devotees, otherwise they wouldn't have their position. But they're mostly neophyte devotees. They accept Lord Vishnu as supreme, but they also have a whole lot of pious credit that they're very happy to spend, right, to enjoy. And so we want to make sure that we're not just falling into that category, because it's all about relationship. So if we know what the relationship is in Sambandha, we act accordingly in Avideya, then we'll become about it, and then we'll reach the true priority. Something to add? Just a smile. Okay. So then, absolute truth without realizing positive traits of the absolute. Right. Definition of the absolute by negation is not complete. Such negative definitions lead one to create a concept of one's own. Thus one imagines that the absolute must be formless and without qualities. Such negative qualities are simply the reversals of relative material qualities, and therefore are also relative. By conceiving of the absolute in this way, one can at the utmost reach the impersonal effulgence of God, known as Brahman, but one cannot make further progress to Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead. So even if one understands this material world through Sankhya and understands that, okay, there's something beyond this material world and that's what I want to reach, and even if we control our senses to the point where we become qualified to leave this material world, it doesn't mean we're going to enter the spiritual world. We enter a place that is like the spiritual world, the Brahmanic effulgence. But as it turns out, and since we humans, we jivas, are active by nature, then being in the Brahmanic effulgence is, even though it's completely spiritual, it turns out to be a bit boring. So we come back down, as Srila Prabhupada says, open hospitals, open places to feed people, homeless shelters, things like that. And we do pious acts because, at least they understand that, accumulating wealth and all that, that's not the goal of life. So at least, helping others. But unless we actually see why are we helping others? Are we actually making the world a better place by doing this? We're making it more comfortable for a few people, but if we're not helping them get out of the material world, we're not solving their problem. They're hungry, we're feeding them. Okay, that's a material pang that they're suffering from. And we're throwing a material solution at it. But the real suffering of all the living entities is that they don't understand Krishna, right? So the only way to actually alleviate suffering is not by feeding someone or healing someone or giving them money. It's by helping them to understand the absolute truth. That takes away suffering. So if we don't get to that point, then we can go to the Brahman effulgence for some time, but we can't progress to Bhagavan until we actually know him. Then in the next sutra, the author reveals that the Supreme Lord does not increase when he creates the universe. Neither does he become less when he destroys the universe. Sutra 9. Sadaika Rupa Purnatva. Because he is perfect and complete, his nature is always unchanged. So my guru, when giving the class on the invocation to the Śrī Īśopaniṣad, he talked about what's called absolute mathematics. So in mathematics, there's this thing called absolute value, which is one thing. But absolute mathematics is a different thing. And it's that Krishna, who is everything, if he gives his everything, he's still complete. So everything minus everything is everything. And everything plus everything is everything. 1 plus 1 is 1, 1 minus 1 is 1. No matter what he expands, he's still perfectly complete. Whatever is taken away, he's still complete. And whatever is added, he's still complete. This is absolute mathematics because he is everything. So he is naturally unchanged. So, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's commentary, yeah.
Another thing your respected Guru Maharaj was saying is that there are certain things, for example, this one, we're quoting from Īśopaniṣad. Somebody says something, but it is authoritative. It is the absolute reality. And somebody else says something, but it is relative truth. It is not absolute. If you give an example of why we accept this. I'm sorry, maybe it's not directly connected because your Guru Maharaj.
That's okay.
Why we accept this as authoritative, as absolute. He gave an example how the judge, when he pronounces the judgment, not the judgment, the verdict. For example, he just says few words that anybody can say. But in this case, they have the power to change somebody's destiny for considerable amount of time. For example, he can sentence somebody to jail time. But this sentence is invested with power, and it creates reality, so to say. So in the same way, whatever Krishna says, whatever Shastra says, it defines reality. And one of the meanings of this word Shastra is also binding ropes. Not in a bad sense, but we are all bound by our duty, and the duties are defined in Shastra. Therefore, it's not just some words, it's different. Mrs. Putin to say something to work with your Guru Maharaj.
Sure.
It's a wonderful insight.
Thank you. Okay, so Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's commentary. In the Īśopaniṣad, it is said, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is perfect and complete, and because he is completely perfect, all emanations from him, such as this phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as complete wholes. Whatever is produced of the complete whole is also complete in itself. Because he is the complete whole, even though so many complete units emanate from him, he remains the complete balance. There's a lot of perfect and complete Purnam. Here, someone may ask, if the Supreme Personality of Godhead is perfect and complete, then what motivates him to create this material world? In the next sutra, the author answers this question. Sutra 10. Karunyam tat kriya hetur nanyat apta kamatvat. Compassion is the motive of his actions. He has no other motive, for his every desire is at once fulfilled without any effort on his part. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur comments.
So if you have somebody like Krishna, who is Satya Sankalpa, then it's kind of easy to understand that whatever he does, it is not for his selfish purposes, because there is nothing for him to attain. He doesn't need anything from you. So logically, if he does something with you, if he has any relationship with you, that is only to benefit. Because you're going to offer anything. And besides one thing, pure love and affection, that's the only thing we can offer. Otherwise, that's interesting.
In the Shruti Shastra, it is said, so Shruti is the Vedic injunction, the conditioned souls act to fulfill their material desires. And the Supreme Personality of Godhead has no need to act to fulfill his desires, for his every wish is at once fulfilled without his having to act. In the Śrī Īśopaniṣad, which are the supplementary presentations of the Vedic injunctions given by great sages, it is said, "There is not anything that the Supreme Personality of Godhead does not attain merely by wishing for it. The conditioned souls are forced to work hard to fulfill their material desires, and even after such hard work, they are still dependent on the Lord's mercy for attaining their goals." In Śrī Īśopaniṣad, Mantra 8, the Supreme Lord is called, quote, "the self-sufficient philosopher who has been fulfilling everyone's desire since time immemorial." The Lord is independent in fulfilling his desires, satya sankalpa, but the living entities are dependent on him. In the purport to Śrī Īśopaniṣad, Mantra 8, Srila Prabhupada writes, "God is described here as Paribhu, the greatest of all. No one is greater than or equal to him. Other living beings are described here as beggars who ask goods from the Lord. The Lord supplies the things the living entities desire. If the entities were equal to the Lord in potency, if they were omnipotent and omniscient, there would be no question of their begging from the Lord, even for so-called liberation. Real liberation means going back to Godhead. Liberation, as conceived of by an impersonalist, is a myth, and begging for sense gratification has to continue eternally unless the beggar comes to his spiritual senses and realizes his constitutional position." That's interesting, and that explains the reason why they end up coming back down from Brahman's so-called liberation, is because if we're not begging to become, to actually come to our spiritual senses and realize our constitutional position, then we will be begging for sense gratification, because our constitutional position is servant to Krishna. There's a relationship there. So even if we understand that we're not this body, we're spirit, we're transcendental to matter, if we don't understand that relationship with Krishna, then that means we are only interested in sense gratification, because it's all about us, what we know, nothing to do with Krishna. There's no relationship. So although technically it's considered liberation because you're at least liberated from most of the material miseries, you still have that one material misery that I need to enjoy something. And I'm the center, so what's going on? So I can't have enjoyment here in this bright place where I can't perceive anything. There's no suffering except for the fact that I have basically this desire that can't be fulfilled. By the mercy of the Lord, the liberated devotee is also satya sankalpa. This is explained in the purport to Srimad Bhagavatam 5.4.5, where Srila Prabhupada describes the symptoms of a jivan mukta. Quote, "Another symptom is apipata, which means that he has no desire other than to engage in the devotional service of Krishna."
There's a question today about symptoms of jivan. You asked. Prabhuji asked about the symptoms of liberated soul.
Well,
Yes.
yeah. So he has no other desire than to engage in the devotional service of Krishna, his dear most pursuable Lord. A further symptom is satyakama, which indicates that all his desires are directed to the supreme truth, Krishna. He does not want anything else. He is satya sankalpa. Whatever he desires is fulfilled by the grace of Krishna, right? Because if all he wants to do is serve Krishna, then whatever he desires is going to come to fruition, because it's a pure desire. First of all, he does not desire anything for his material benefit, and secondly, if he desires anything at all, he simply desires to serve the Supreme Lord. That desire is fulfilled by the Lord's grace. That is called Satya Sankalpa. Right? So it's not that we become desireless, right? That's another misunderstanding. We become materially desireless, but we desire to serve Krishna because we are individuals. So it's not that desire is bad, it's just desire with us in the center is bad. Desire with Krishna in the center is perfection. Then, in Srimad Bhagavatam 3.7, 2, and 3, Vidura asks the following question. O great Brahmana, since the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the complete spiritual whole and is unchangeable, how is he connected with the material modes of nature and their activities? If this is his pastime, how do the activities of the unchangeable take place and exhibit qualities without the modes of nature? Boys are enthusiastic to play with other boys or with various diversions because they are encouraged by desire. But there is no possibility of such desire in the Lord because he is self-satisfied and detached from everything at all times. Sri Maitreya Muni answers in these words, Srimad Bhagavatam 3.7.9. Certain conditioned souls put forward the theory that the Supreme Brahman or Supreme Personality of Godhead is overcome by illusion or maya. And at the same time, they maintain that he is unconditioned. This is against all logic. Continuing Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's commentary. What is the underlying selfish interest of the Lord in performing his pastimes? The reply is that the Lord is not motivated by any type of selfish interest because he is free of selfish desires whatsoever. Only his mercy for the conditioned souls is the reason for his pastimes. And that is the end of chapter 1 of Śrī Tattva-sutra. So it's saying that since he doesn't have any desires, the question is, so then what's the deal? Why make this material world? And the answer was this compassion. And that seems like a strange thing to say. Why would that be considered compassionate? Most people in this material world think that it was kind of mean for God to put us in this situation because it's miserable. Really what it comes down to is it's miserable, it's uncomfortable, it's unfair in our eyes, right? If God is all loving and he is capable of anything, then he's capable of putting us in a very nice situation. So what's the deal, God?
There are people who are,
Why you gotta put me here?
there are people who are suing their parents.
People are suing their parents
For having them without asking.
for having them without asking.
So yes, the people, I have got people from India, from West of.
They didn't get their permission to conceive them.
Right. So now they are suing the parents for that.
Have any of them won?
One? I don't know, at least more than one.
No, I mean, have any of them won the
I
case?
don't think so.
No, okay.
They want money from the parents, so they don't work.
Okay, because, I get it. So I didn't ask you to make me,
Yeah.
so therefore you have to support me forever. Okay.
I mean, this cannot alleviate the pain, but at least something. Just see, the human form of life is so rare, it's such a precious opportunity, and the parents are worshipable just because they gave us this opportunity, even if they're not devotees. And Tamaguna turns everything upside down. The parents are not worshipable, but they are culprits.
They're punishable.
Punishable.
So the explanation of why that would be actually considered compassion in this world full of miseries that he created, how is that compassion? Do you have an answer to that one? Or Tulsi, do you have an answer to that one? How is this miserable material world an example of his compassion?
Because
Yeah. Sunshine knows. Huh? You don't know how to explain? Try it. No? I don't want to put you on the spot.
I feel I know, but
I think you know too. I think we all know, but
it's difficult to explain.
you want to try or no? No, okay. Anyone?
Because we wanted to enjoy separately from him.
Yeah?
And
And?
despite that, although this is not our position, so still he is giving us this opportunity to do it.
There it is. There it is. The compassion is because we who have free will, which I'll get to more later because it's important because otherwise sometimes we say, take away my free will. Has anyone ever prayed that to Krishna? When you're praying to Krishna, you're like, you know what? I keep making these bad decisions. Just take away my free will and let me be your servant. I'll get to that more later. But Prabhu is pointing out, since we had this desire to enjoy separate from him, which is impossible because what is separate from Krishna? We've already established that he's everything. There's no such thing as separate from Krishna. But since we wanted to be separate from Krishna, he had to make this elaborate illusion so that we feel that we're actually separate. And none of us are in danger at any point, because the soul can't be cut to pieces, withered by the wind, moistened by water, right? Cut. And so here we are in this miserable place, but we're actually not really in any true danger. Because Krishna had compassion for us, who very selfishly, we each said, no, Krishna, I don't want to serve you. I want to be on my own, right? So the reason why free will is important is that if you think of love, right, love is a dynamic thing. It's not a mechanical thing, right? So that means there has to be a choice. There has to be an option to not love, right? Otherwise, what's love? If there's no option to not love, love has no sweetness whatsoever, right? It's just a cog in a machine, right? So love means there has to be the option of not love, which means we have to have free will, right? And so we made a bad choice. We wanted to see what it would be like to be the center of our own universe. We wanted to be separate from Krishna, but there's no such thing as separate from Krishna. He's everything. So there were two options that Krishna had at that point in time. Either blink this silly fellow out of existence because he wants to be separate from me, so done, gone. Or make this elaborate illusion that's made from nothing but his own body, where we use parts of him and we manipulate them to get our own pleasure, to forget him, but all we're using is him, different aspects of him. All of the things that we appreciate, the way they serve us, they're actually meant to, give him pleasure, but we're using it. It's like when, I think I gave the example the other day, when we want to be independent, right? So I think I gave the example of a bicycle, riding a bicycle when we're really little. We're learning to ride a bicycle, it has training wheels on it, right? And so we're riding, but then we don't want the training wheels. We're big boys now, so take those training wheels off. But we don't have balance yet still. So our parent is holding onto the back of the bike, holding it up, right? But if the kid knows that the parent's holding it up, then he doesn't feel very happy about it. But if the parent is hiding, the kid turns over this way and he goes that way. And then the kid thinks, oh yeah, I'm doing this. And he has this sense of accomplishment, even though the kid definitely doesn't have balance. If the parent let go, the kid would get knocked over, he'd have the skin knee, he'd cry to his mama, and he'd never want to ride the bicycle ever again, right? So here we are in this material world, and Krishna is doing everything for us, and we're so proud of what we're doing. We're really not doing anything, right? So that's why this material world, which we perceive as a place of only suffering, is actually just Krishna's compassion, because he has no desires. He doesn't need, he didn't need to make it. He made it for us, right? You want to say something? No.
No, I just remember that the word in the sutra is karunya.
Karunya.
Because of mercy, because of compassion.
Karunyam, yeah, compassion, mercy. Yeah, he has no other motive. So we tend to think that nothing's our fault. It can't be my fault, right? Kids, as Pandavaji just pointed out, are suing their parents because it's not their fault they were born. Their parents did it, so they should be, give me money to maintain me for the rest of my life. I didn't ask to be born. It's not their fault, right? And we think that in this in this conditioned state, it can't be my fault that I'm here in this material world. I wouldn't have made such a bad decision. It must be that either we like to blame Maya. We like to blame, depending on what background we come from, we like to blame the devil or things like that. Or, something. It can't be, it's somebody, but it's just not me. It's not my fault. Maybe it's God's fault. He gave me free will. What was he thinking? Right? I can even blame God. But it's our fault, and we have to come to terms with that. Because if we don't come to terms with that, we don't have Sambandha. We don't know who we are, we don't know who Krishna is, and we don't know what our relationship is. We're not owning up to the fact that we made a really, really dumb mistake, right? And the only way to reverse it is to put Krishna back in the center, right? And that's going to become clear in the second chapter. And so we have a summary of chapter 1, which I'll read, and then we'll probably stop after that if there's any discussion. So, summary of chapter 1. Chapter 1 of Śrī Tattva-sutra pertains to the first topic of the Upanishads, the nature of Brahman. So there are 5 topics of the Upanishads. Who remembers them? Brahman is the first one.
Shiva.
Also known as Chit, and then Achit, which is material nature. And then?
Kala.
So these are in Bhagavad Gita, there's 5 topics. So the Upanishads, there's, are you looking? Cheater. Cheater. It's okay, you can cheat.
The way how you attain goal.
Sadhana. Sadhana and sadhya.
Sadhana and sadhya, which is Abhidheya and Prayojana, the means to attain the goal and then the goal. Right. So chapter 1 is the nature of Brahman, Ishvara, and then Shivaji. So Sri Krishna is one without a second. He is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Although transcendental to material qualities, he possesses expansive, immense potencies inconceivable to mundane perception. Innumerable contradictory qualities simultaneously existing in him is nothing uncommon or wonderful, right? We think that that's a big thing. I can't conceive of these two things coexisting in my small brain, so it must be the most wonderful thing in the world, right? We think that, like, when we see a chemical reaction, we think, oh man, I could, 2 liquids, you mix them together and then it makes some sort of foam? That's brilliant. Or it explodes, and we think, oh, I've never seen such a thing before. We think it's, doesn't make any sense. We think it's a big thing, but for Krishna, it's nothing, right? Lord Sri Krishna, whose form is eternal, fully conscious, and blissful, is not perceivable by mundane faculties, but he can be realized only by transcendental, unalloyed devotional service. Because the only reason that we're not understanding him now, which actually we're going to get to in the next chapter, again, I said we have a position and a nature, and that's knowledge and love. So that's there in the soul. When we misuse the free will, then that knowledge goes to material things instead of toward him. So when we reverse that decision, and instead of trying to accumulate knowledge based on our material desires, and we just base them on what Krishna wants, what he provides in the Vedas, the Shruti and the Smriti, then we can actually understand his nature. Then he is beyond the influence of time and space. Although transcendental to matter and spirit, he expands through his diverse energies as the cosmic manifestation consisting of both matter and spirit. For his pastimes, he is identical with his transcendental potency. The supremely independent Lord Sri Krishna is never affected by his creation, although he is the cause of all causes. Since he is the complete absolute truth, the cosmic manifestation or annihilation does not change his fullness. Devoid of any material need and desire, he performs his transcendental activities only due to his causeless mercy. That is the end of chapter 1. Any questions on chapter 1?
So chapter 1 deals with Brahman, then chapter 2 will be with Jiva. Right?
Nature of the soul. So topics 2 and 3 are sorted together. So it'll be the nature of the soul and the material energy. So Chit and not Chit. Because most of the Upanishad verses deal with those together, understanding them both side by side. And one result is from one and one result is from the other. So they're presented as a pair. But then they're also sort of, they're also addressed separately. They're simultaneously addressed as a pair and separately. Okay. Nothing about the Supreme Lord and his nature? Does anybody still doubt that it's because of his compassion that the material world exists? It's a tough one to swallow. Most people, that's why deism comes in, because they figure, well, God has to be perfect. Since the material world's not perfect, he can't have anything to do with it. So he basically created it, and then but he has nothing to do with it. He stands back from it. He created it and its laws, and if we follow them, we can get out. But he has nothing to do with it. That's that philosophy.
It's the problem of evil. It's the problem of the evil, philosophical, theological problem since centuries in medieval Europe. Now they're battling, starting grappling hard with this problem.
Why do bad things happen to good people?
Right. If the God is benevolent and omnipotent, then why then there is evil? And as Shoshank said, some people try to get away with deism. There are other people who are saying that actually material was not created by God.
Created by a rival.
It was created by Demiurge, some kind of. Some people say by Satan directly. So the spiritual world is created by God, but the material world is it's a different creator. Of course, Brahma created the material world in a sense, but universe, but still he was following the blueprint of Krishna. So it's a tough one. And I haven't seen outside the Vedic version, I haven't seen people actually answering this question.
No, the only thing they'll say God has a plan and we still don't understand it. But we actually have more of the proper explanation.
Because part of the problem is that because they don't accept the reincarnation, and without the reincarnation it's impossible even to directly to conceive how why there is so much suffering. Because then the question comes why young children are being why they suffer. They're born terrible conditions and take no test. Because they don't accept it.
Right. And then that way, for them, life is a pass or fail course. You either go to eternal hell or eternal heaven. And that doesn't seem like a very fair deity, right? God's the most fair. Why would he put forth such a okay, you might say, whatever, it's pass or fail, that's fair. Either you have it or you don't. But if it is pass or fail, then everybody should start with the same opportunities, right? But some people are born in a place where they will never hear about God. Others are born, so with all those different varieties, they don't have an explanation for that.
Okay. only thing they can say is God is just. You don't rebel against Him. No, okay, well that's fine, but there must be some explanation because God is also national.
They rely on Lokika Shraddha, but not Shastriya Shraddha, because they don't have the explanation. But they have deep faith. And if you try to change their mind, you're not going to be able to do it. So it's not deep, it's strong. They have strong faith. It's very shallow. But yeah, it's a pretty crazy debate, and we actually have the answer, and sometimes we forget we have the answer. But yeah, we have to understand that, because otherwise it comes back to it's not my fault. A lot of us blame Maya, right? Maya tempted me. The only reason Maya's messing with you is because you wanted to be independent from Krishna. She will stop messing with you as soon as you focus on Krishna service. Because she's there to serve you in your service to Krishna, if that's what you plan on doing. But if you plan on serving yourself, then she's there to serve that, right? So which Maya we're dealing with, Maha or Yoga, will depend on our consciousness. So we can't blame Maya either, right? We've chosen to sit on that ugly witch's lap. So, yeah, these are all things that are important for us to understand, because then we'll understand what our actual relationship is with Krishna. And then, so then we'll have some hope. Oh, now it's 5:30. Om Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Bhakti-Vinod Thakur ki jai, Shri Tattva-sutra ki jai.